and I tell the stories that remind you why the truth always finds its way back around. Hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. The Karma Diaries never lies. Now, let me tell you about Nathaniel. I want to start by telling you something about myself so you understand how I am wired, because it matters to the way this story goes. I set my alarm 15 minutes earlier than I need to every single morning. Not to exercise, not to read, just to lie there in the dark and think before the world starts pulling on me. My crew at work calls me the weather, because I do not change no matter what is happening around me. I am 41 years old. I have been calm in situations that would have broken other men. But I will tell you right now, the night my wife told me to leave my own home, I had to work hard to keep that calm. Harder than I have ever worked at anything. My name is Nathaniel Brewster. I am a senior project manager for a commercial construction firm in Nashville, Tennessee. I have been with that firm for 14 years. Started out delivering blueprints between job sites in a pickup truck that needed a new transmission. Worked my way up to the position I hold now, where the partners call me first when a project starts going sideways. I am methodical. I am patient. I read everything I sign. I do not make decisions quickly, and I do not make them emotionally. Those habits are the reason I am standing here with the outcome I have. Keep that in mind. My wife, my ex-wife now, her name is Portia. She is 38, and she is a marketing director for a regional healthcare company on the east side of the city. She is the kind of woman who walks into a room and recalibrates it without saying a word. Striking, sharp, fully aware of both those things. She had a laugh that could fill a restaurant, and in the first years of our marriage, I loved that laugh more than I knew how to say. We were married 9 years. The first 4 were genuinely good. Then we moved into the house on Belshire Terrace, and something in Portia shifted, and I spent the next 5 years being too patient to admit it. The mansion on Belshire Terrace is the kind of property people slow their cars down to look at. For bedrooms, cathedral ceilings in the main room, a wraparound porch looking out over a back acre, with a stone garden my mother helped me plant the first spring we moved in. The neighborhood sits in a quiet pocket of East Nashville. Old trees, wide lots, the kind of silence at night you do not find easily inside the city. I want you to understand how much that house means to me, not because of what it looks like, but because of where it came from and who has always held it. My mother, Claudette Brewster, bought that property 22 years ago. She paid for it outright using the life insurance money from my stepfather's passing, put the deed in her name alone, and has never wavered on that decision since. My mother is 67 years old, and she has the kind of stillness that comes from having outlasted several things that were supposed to break her. She does not trust verbal agreements. She does not leave important things to chance. When Portia and I needed somewhere to land 7 years ago, our apartment lease ended. The home purchase we had lined up fell through at the last minute. My mother made us an offer. Live in the house. Pay the utilities. Maintain the property. The deed stays in my name. Nathaniel, you are family. You are welcome here. Portia, you are welcome as his wife. That was the arrangement. Portia said yes with a smile and spent the next 6 months redecorating like she had purchased the place herself. I noticed that. I told myself it did not mean anything. That was one of the first times I edited my own instincts into something more comfortable, and it would not be the last. The disrespect crept in the way damage does behind walls. Invisible for a long time, until one day you cannot ignore the smell. She started calling it her house in conversation. Not our house. Hers. I heard it first at a dinner party we hosted for her colleagues. She touched the newly refinished porch railing and said, I had the porch redone last fall. I had paid for that refinishing. I had been on site at 7 a.m. checking the contractor's work. I smiled and said nothing. By the following winter, the small corrections had accumulated into a pattern I could no longer pretend was accidental. She would talk over me when I was giving guests directions to the house. She stopped consulting me on home decisions and announced them after the fact. She upgraded the entire kitchen without mentioning a word to me, and I overheard her telling her sister on the phone that she had always wanted a chef's kitchen and was finally doing something about it. I was standing in the hallway, holding a glass of water. I listened through the cracked door. I went to the garage afterward. like I always did when something needed processing, and I sat on my folding chair next to my grandfather's tools and drank my water in the quiet. That garage was the only room in the mansion where I still felt fully like myself. The first thing that made unease turn into something sharper was a phone call I overheard in March. I had come into the side door after a run, and Portia was in the kitchen with her back to me, her voice low and deliberate in the way people speak when every word is chosen. I heard her say, "Just make sure everything looks clean before we move forward." She turned, saw me, and the sentence stopped. "Work stuff," she said, and changed the subject without missing a beat. I opened the refrigerator. I told myself she was probably right. That was me editing again. Then came the attorney's card. I found it in the breast pocket of her blazer when I was pulling clothes together for the dry cleaner in April. The name on it was Gerald Fitch, ESQ, and the specialty listed on the back was family law and property transfers. I set the card on the dresser and looked at it for longer than I needed to. I told myself it was possibly a work contact. Her company managed property leases. It was not impossible. I put the card back in her pocket and dropped the blazer at the cleaners and did not say one word to her about it. But I remembered. I am the kind of man who remembers. She started asking questions that spring, framed as casual curiosity. Does your name appear anywhere on the deed? When your mother set up the living arrangement, was that ever documented in writing? I gave her the honest answers. No. She nodded and moved on. Later I would understand she had been building something one question at a time, constructing the foundation of a plan from the answers I gave freely because I had no reason to hide them. In May, I got an account alert showing a transfer of $32,000 from our joint savings to an account I did not recognize. She had a folder ready when I asked. The folder was full of official-looking documents about investment accounts and tax efficiency. I was not an attorney. That was the problem. I called my cousin Darius. He went to law school, practices in Louisville, and has known me since we were kids eating at the same Sunday table. I described what I was seeing without naming names. He was quiet for a long moment and then said, "Nate, what you are describing sounds like asset positioning before divorce filing." I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a hardware store and stared at the steering wheel. 3 more transfers followed over the next 6 weeks, each one slightly under the threshold that triggers an automatic bank alert, each one with a clean paper explanation. I did not confront her. I opened my own conversation with Darius. I started a folder of my own. The night Portia ended our marriage was a Tuesday in June. The air in Nashville still held the day's heat well past 9 o'clock. She waited until dinner was finished, and she had cleared the dishes and wiped down the counter. That detail has stayed with me. The way she wiped down the counter first, like she needed the surface clean before she could say what she had come to say. She sat across from me with both hands flat on the table and said, "I want a divorce, Nathaniel. I have already spoken to my attorney. I think you should start thinking about where you're going to go. Now I need to talk to you. Now I haven't been happy. Just where you're going to go." I asked if we could consider counseling. She said she was past that. I asked if there was a specific moment, something I had done. She said it was not one thing. It was everything, which is the kind of answer someone gives when they have rehearsed this enough that they stop tracking the details. Then she said the sentence she had clearly been saving. "The house is in my name, Nathaniel. Not yours. Mine. I have already spoken to an attorney about protecting my interest in this property. You need to find somewhere else to live." She slid a document across the table as she said it, a notice of intent to claim residential occupancy rights, filed through Gerald Fitch's office. She had planned this down to the folded hands. I looked at her for a long moment. My thumb moved to the inside of my wedding ring and then stopped. "Where did you get that idea?" I asked. "My attorney did his research," she said. "The deed is in the name of Claudette Brewster, not a marital asset. I have rights as an established resident of this property, and I intend to pursue them. You have a week." She said it the way someone says something they have been rehearsing for months. Confidence. Final. I stood up slowly. I picked up the document. I said, "All right." She expected tears or a raised voice or negotiation. Instead, I walked to the garage, sat in my chair, and called my mother. Claudette picked up on the second ring, the way she always does when something matters. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting once, which is how I know when she is thinking clearly and not just reacting. When I finished, she said, "Baby, come home tonight. We will talk in the morning." I drove to Edgemont Avenue with one bag and a folder of documents. My mother had coffee on the stove when I arrived. She was already dressed, though it was past 10 at night. There was a manila folder on the kitchen table. I sat down. She pushed the folder across to me and said, "Sit down," and I realized she had been waiting for this. Not because she had predicted it, but because she was the kind of woman who prepares for the things she hopes will never happen. Inside the folder was the original deed to the mansion on Belshire Terrace, dated 22 years back, with Claudette Marie Brewster listed as sole owner. Beside it was a document I had never seen, a revocable living trust agreement she had drawn up 4 years ago through her own attorney, a woman named Priya Mehta, who practices on Weston Avenue in Nashville. My mother had put the property into a trust after watching my Aunt Lorraine lose 3 years of her life to a family property dispute. I didn't want what happened to Lorraine happening to my house. She told me. I did not say anything for a while. I just looked at the papers and thought about how many things my mother had handled quietly while I was not looking. The trust changed everything Portia's attorney had built his case on. Priya's letter, which was already drafted and sitting in that folder. My mother had called her before I even finished packing my bag. Explained it plainly in 2 paragraphs. Portia's claim was based on a misreading of tenant occupancy law as it applied to property held in trust. As a family member and named trust beneficiary, I had residential rights. As a non-family member with no ownership interest and no lease agreement, Portia did not. The filing Fitch had submitted was built on a false premise, and that false premise had just created a recordable title complication that my mother was prepared to pursue remedy for. Priya sent formal notice to Fitch's office on a Thursday morning. Fitch called me directly. Attorneys at that level do not make personal calls unless the situation has shifted significantly. His voice was carefully neutral, the voice of a man who had been caught miscalculating. He said he was reaching out as a professional courtesy to clarify some aspects of the property situation. I told him my attorney would follow up and ended the call. When I told Darius about it, he laughed for about 4 seconds and then said, "Nate, he is trying to figure out how bad his exposure is." I let Priya handle it from there. Portia called me that evening. She was angry, not broken, which told me she still believed she could argue her way through this. "Your mother is trying to make me homeless," she said. "My mother owns a house." "Portia," I said, "she always has. You knew that when we moved in. She let us live there for 7 years. She let me live there. You were there as my wife. That was different from it being yours." A long pause. Then, who did she call? How did she know already? I said, "She's my mother," and left it at that. There was nothing else to add. The answer was in the folder she had already had sitting on the table before I even arrived. While the legal situation was resolving, Portia ran her other campaign. She called my sister Renata and told her I had been emotionally absent for years, that she had stayed too long out of loyalty, that she was worried my family was going to weaponize the property situation. She used the word weaponize. Renata called me afterward and said she used a lot of legal vocabulary for someone describing a heartbreak. She told the neighbors, the Caldwells, that I had left on my own and she had simply formalized it. She told her Tuesday morning run group that my mother had always interfered in the marriage, that the house being my mother's name was about control, that Portia had never been allowed to feel secure. It was a clean story. She had built marketing campaigns professionally for 15 years. She knew how the narrative worked. I ran into her at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after I left. She was with a man I did not recognize, tall, close-cropped hair, laughing at something on her phone. She saw me and the man's posture shifted immediately, which told me he already knew who I was. She introduced him as a colleague. His name was Terrence. I said it was good to see her, bought my tomatoes, and walked to my truck. I sat there for 4 minutes. Then I started the engine and drove to my mother's house on Edgemont Avenue, and we ate lunch and watched the nature program, and I did not mention what I had seen. There was nothing to say about it. It confirmed what I already knew, and confirming something you already know does not require conversation. The divorce proceedings did the exposure work I never had to do. Financial discovery in a divorce is thorough when you have an attorney, who knows what to ask for. The transfers surfaced immediately. The timeline reconstructed itself through court documents. Portia had opened her personal account 4 months before she told me she wanted a divorce. She had first consulted Fitch 6 months before that. Her browser history, subpoenaed as part of discovery, showed a pattern of searches about adverse possession and residential occupancy rights going back 14 months. She had been researching this while we were still eating dinner together every night, while I was still setting my alarm 15 minutes early and running my thumb along the inside of a wedding ring. Her claim to the house collapsed entirely when Priya filed the full trust documentation with the court. Fitch withdrew the residential occupancy claim within 48 hours of receiving the trust instrument. The foundation of Portia's plan, the thing she had built everything on, simply did not exist. I later found out that Fitch had warned her before the initial filing that the trust situation made the occupancy claim uncertain, and that she had told him to file anyway. That decision told me something I had needed to understand for a long time. Portia had not miscalculated out of ignorance. She had bet on aggression over accuracy, and she had lost. The $32,000 and the funds from the other transfers were frozen pending a full accounting. The judge issued the order after reviewing the pattern of withdrawals. The timing, the amounts, all of it landing in the 6 months before the divorce filing. Portia's attorney filed 2 objections. Both were denied. The spousal support claim she had initially demanded, citing the lifestyle she had grown accustomed to in the property, did not survive contact with the evidence of what she had done with. The joint funds. The judge is not a complicated device. Present the timeline, present the documents, and let the logic speak. I was not in the courtroom for most of it. I was at job sites, doing my work, talking to my crew, eating lunch in my truck, living in the rhythm of normal days while the legal process ran its course. My mother attended one session, at Priya's request, to testify briefly about the trust and its terms. She wore a navy dress and pearl earrings and answered every question in complete sentences without elaborating beyond what was asked. My attorney told me afterward that she had been the most composed witness he had seen in a long time. I was not surprised. Claudette has never needed an audience to validate what was hers. The Caldwells next door were not as neutral as Portia had assumed. They told me later what those final weeks in the house looked like. She stopped cooking. She stayed up late with the lights burning in the main room. She had a long phone call with Terrence that they could hear through the open window one evening, and it did not sound comfortable. By the 3rd week of the notice period, she was taking walks alone at odd hours, coming back quieter each time. I heard these things and felt something I want to be careful about naming. Not satisfaction, because that is not an emotion I am proud of. Closer to the feeling of watching a complicated structure finally settle after a long stress test. The numbers came out the way the math said they should. The last day Portia was in the house. I was not there. I arranged it deliberately. I sent my attorney and a property representative to oversee the process. I was at my mother's house on Edgemont Avenue, and we ate lunch and watched television, and she told me about a neighbor's new dog and a recipe that had not turned out the way she intended. My phone buzzed twice with updates from my attorney, and I did not look at them until the program was over. What I was told afterward was that Portia had been quiet the entire time. Efficient. She moved through the rooms without making a production of it. She paused once in the main room and looked up at the cathedral ceiling for a moment. No one spoke. She picked up a photograph on the mantel, the 2 of us at a friend's wedding years ago, and then set it back down and left it there. She carried her boxes to the car by herself. She did not ask for help. She did not look back from the driveway. My attorney texted me a single line when it was done. Property is clear. I read it, set my phone face down on my mother's kitchen table, and helped her with the dishes. There was nothing dramatic about the ending once it arrived. There rarely is. The drama lives in the middle of these things, in the months of uncertainty and second-guessing, and running your thumb along a ring that means less every day. The ending is usually quiet. This one was. Terrence relocated out of state for a job a few months later. The connection with Portia did not survive the distance. I heard that through the same channel. I heard most things. Not because I was tracking it, but because Nashville is not as large as it looks on a map, and people talk. I did not feel what I expected to feel when I heard it. I expected something. Relief, maybe, or a grim kind of indication. Instead, I felt nothing much at all. She had made a plan that required his presence. And his presence had been contingent on the prize she was trying to take. And without the prize, there was nothing to hold him there. That is not a lesson I needed, but it is the one she got. The divorce was finalized on a Wednesday in November. My attorney sent me a text. I was on a job site in Murfreesboro, walking a structural inspection with my crew. I read the message, put my phone in my pocket, and finished the inspection. I noted 3 items for a follow-up. I had my foreman document them. On the drive back to Nashville, I turned the radio up and let myself feel the road under the truck and thought about what I wanted to plant in the garden come spring. That is as dramatic as my reaction got. The weather did not change. I moved back into the mansion on Belshire Terrace on a Saturday morning in late September, 2 weeks before the divorce was finalized. I unlocked the front door, stood in the main room for a moment with my keys in my hand, and then went to the garage first. I set up my thermos on the folding table. I checked the tools my grandfather left me, each one hanging in the same order on the pegboard where I had put them years ago. I spent the first afternoon fixing a gutter that had been loose since spring. Then I went inside, made coffee, and stood on the wraparound porch in the cooling air and looked out over the back acre and thought, this is mine. Not in triumph, just an acknowledgement. The way you acknowledge a fact that has always been true. The stone garden needed work after months of neglect. My mother came out 2 Saturdays later, and we pulled weeds and reset stones that had shifted over the summer. She brought 2 sandwiches wrapped in foil, and we ate on the back step in the October sun. She talked about a neighbor's renovations and a book she was reading and what she wanted to try grow along the south wall next year. I listened and felt something settle in me that had been out of place for a long time. I did not have a precise word for it. Peace was close, but too smooth. Solid was closer. The feeling of standing on ground that will not move. My mother gave me a document at the kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in December. It was a deed amendment and successor trustee designation. Her attorney had drafted it to name me as co-owner and successor trustee in her estate plan. She handed it across with her coffee cup still in her other hand, the way she hands over anything important, without ceremony. This was always going to be yours, she said. I was just holding it until you were ready. I looked at the paper for a long time. I folded it carefully and put it in the inside pocket of my jacket. Then I drove home to Belshire Terrace and made dinner from scratch, the way she had taught me, and ate at my own table in my own house in quiet I had finally stopped being afraid of. People asked me what the hardest part was. Not the transfers, not the legal filings, not the loneliness of those weeks at Darius's place or the farmer's market or the sound of my name in her mouth when she said, "You have a week." The hardest part was learning to trust what I had already seen. I spent months editing my own instincts into more charitable readings, smoothing the edges off things that were sharper than I wanted to admit. I had been taught to be patient and to reserve judgment and to give people room to be who they actually are. Those are not bad habits. But I applied them past the point where the evidence had already spoken, and I let that patience cost me time I will not get back. I am done editing. I earned that. The mansion on Belshire Terrace sits on just under an acre in East Nashville, and on the right morning in early spring, before the city noise builds up, you can hear birds from the back porch that you would not expect to hear this close to downtown. I stand out there some mornings with my coffee and my 15 extra minutes, and I think about what my mother did 22 years ago with a deed and a decision and a quiet kind of foresight that never announced itself. She bought a piece of ground, and she held it, and she held it, and she held it. And then one day it was the thing that kept her son from losing the life he had built. That is not a small thing. That is the whole story, if you want to find the center of it. And that is where Nathaniel's story lands. Not in a courtroom argument, not in a public confrontation, but on a back porch with a cup of coffee and a garden his mother helped him plant. Portia built her plan on an assumption. Claudette built hers on paper. Paper 1. If this story moved you today, hit that like button right now. It tells me to keep going. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed yet, do it right now, because new stories drop every single week, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. I am Uncle Sammy. The Karma Diaries never lies. The end.